And, and the progressives connection is relevant to what's being discussed tonight, because the progressive was founded by Robert M. La Follette, the great Wisconsin governor and U.S. senator. And in 1917, when the Espionage Act was enacted, Robert M. La Follette was one of a handful of U.S. senators who opposed this country's entry into World War I. And what he warned about at that time was that the war would be used as an excuse to assault civil liberties and civil rights in the United States. He was exactly correct about that. He warned in a speech called Free Speech in Wartime that freedom of the press would be threatened by not just the entry into the war and all the energies that went around it, but also by the enactment of legislation designed specifically to shut down a free and open discourse in the United States about what was being done in the name of the American people without their informed consent. This is what La Follette warned about in 1917. It's what has informed the Progressive magazine since then. And there's a Wisconsin connection to the story of Julian Assange, because one of the first people to be prosecuted under the Espionage Act was Victor Berger, the publisher of the Milwaukee Leader. The Milwaukee Leader was effectively banned from distribution in the mails. Victor Berger was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in jail for publishing anti-war statements under the Espionage Act. Now, Berger fought that case and ultimately won in the U.S. Supreme Court. But that case, his conviction in 1919, was used as an excuse to bar him from taking his seat in the United States Congress when he was elected in the 1918 election by the people of Milwaukee to represent them in Congress. The other members of Congress refused to let him take his seat, very relevant to our current discussions as regards Tennessee and the expulsion or barring of members of Congress. And so the Espionage Act has been used for more than 100 years to shut down journalism and to shut down honest discourse about matters of war and peace. And it's one of the reasons that I feel a personal responsibility to speak out on these issues. As a working journalist, I think it is vital that the people who use and take advantage of freedom of the press in the United States also defend it. And that defense of freedom of the press has to bring us around to the case of Julian Assange. Julian Assange is not an American, but he did the work of exposing what the U.S. government was doing, what the U.S. military was doing, and he did so in the way that journalists do. He got a fleet, and he worked with that information and published it. Now, you can like Julian Assange, you can dislike him, you can like his dad, his brother, dislike him. But what you cannot deny is that if Julian Assange is returned to the United States and prosecuted under the Espionage Act for the supposed crime of gathering information, reporting that information, publishing that information, then you have opened up a new avenue by which the United States government can, even more aggressively than it has in the past, seek to shut down discourse about matters of war and peace. It doesn't have to stop at matters of war and peace. It could be extended beyond that. But the bottom line is, this is something that cannot stand. And it's very vital to understand that slowly, U.S. journalists have begun to speak up on this issue. Last year, you saw a number, and that's what this article Laura was referencing. Last year, you saw a number of U.S. journalists, prominent publications, including the New York Times, Washington Post, and others, speak out about this issue and finally clearly say that prosecution of Julian Assange would be a threat to journalism. So we're seeing a beginning of a real discourse about this. But I have to emphasize, it's not as bold as it should be. I, for many years, have been involved with the International Federation of Journalists, which is the coalition of unions that represent journalists around the world. I've keynoted their international conferences twice and worked with them on a number of issues. And the IFJ, the International Federation of Journalists, has been way out front on these fundamental issues because they recognize that if you criminalize what Julian Assange did, you will ultimately end up criminalizing journalism, not just in the United States, but in countries around the world. So this is a vital issue for journalists. It is a vital issue for freedom of the press. And frankly, it's a vital issue for democracy. Because the fact of the matter is, as Robert M. La Follette warned back in 1917, if you do not have a free press in a time of war, if you do not have an honest discourse at a point when a country might be entering into war or might already be engaged in war, if you cannot expose what is being done to either draw that country into the war or to maintain that country's presence in the war, then you have lost the ability in a democracy to have the most vital of all debates, and that is whether your country will commit itself to military action abroad that might well involve not just the deaths of people from your country, but the deaths of people from other countries. That's a fundamental debate that every country should always have before a war and even during a war. And yet, if you use the Espionage Act and other tools to shut down free and open discourse, you threaten that essential small d democratic principle. And so, in the name of Robert M. La Follette and the great progressive tradition in Wisconsin, I will simply say the United States government should drop the charges against Julian Assange and end this persecution, not just of a man, but of the practice of journalism. Thank you very much.